The best leaders are the ones that are open to new ideas. And that's what keeps businesses going, right? You happen to make it past that first year when most businesses fail anyway. It's still, if you last 10 years, it's been an amazing run. And that's sad. The whole idea of incorporating is it's supposed to live forever. And that doesn't work out very often.
Welcome to the Learn It All podcast, the show for today's leaders who want to get ahead and stay ahead, because we believe great leaders aren't born or made, they're always in the making. I'm your host, Damon Lemby, two-time best-selling author and CEO of Learn It, a live learning platform that has upskilled over 2 million people. In just a moment, I'll be joined by Rob Duboff. He's the co-founder of Hawk Partners, a seasoned marketing strategist, and longtime instructor of decision-making at Harvard University Extension School. I can't wait to jump into this conversation with Rob because we're going to discuss why most decisions are mysteries, not puzzles, the biases that sabotage even the smartest leaders, how healthy conflict is a key to building strong cultures, and the secret to turning bad decisions into your biggest breakthroughs. I've heard you say that you believe that decision-making should be looked at as a mystery instead of a puzzle. Can you elaborate a little bit about what you mean by that?
Sure. Well, I picked this up in doing some reading. I first learned about this dichotomy from Malcolm Gladwell, although he didn't invent it. But it's a way to think, first of all, to triage decisions, because too often we act like this decision, like where should I move, is a puzzle. There's an answer. Just do a spreadsheet, criteria, decision tree, and there you are. You've got the answer. And of course, that's wrong. It's many of the decisions are mysteries. That is, there is no definitive answer. And a puzzle has an answer. A mystery often doesn't, except in the kind of books you and I read. So that's why I say you should look at decision-making as a mystery. It's not something you're going to solve with some kind of mathematical formula. Too often people try, and they end up doing something that maybe conventional wisdom would say makes sense, but doesn't make sense for them. Our decisions are all personal. What you might want to do is different than what I might want to do. And therefore our decisions we can both make a very good decision for us, and it's not the same decision, not the same outcome. So that's why I feel that way.
Using that approach, we talked a little bit about, buying a house and moving. That's a very, pretty common one. Do you have an example of looking at decisions as a mystery where it actually worked out and made a better decision that way?
Some of the famous examples of decision-making are Benjamin Franklin and Darwin, who both decided they would make decisions about, I think, marriage. I'm sure that's what Darwin's was. Maybe Franklin's was something else. My memory might be wrong on that. But you do a spreadsheet. So I had a student in the class I teach, executive ed, and he tried the same spreadsheet, and it ended up telling him he shouldn't propose to this woman. And he did. He hadn't taken the course yet, so he didn't need my course. He overruled his formula. And I think that's the perfect example. I just had a student this last semester who wrote their paper on, they had been divorced and they married out of love, they thought, now in retrospect, got divorced. And so this next time they wanted to get married again. They didn't know anybody yet, by the way. And they were going to do it scientifically. And the grade was still good. They understood the concepts from the course, but that would be a bad example. They were obviously reacting to what was probably a good decision the first time. It just didn't work out. So that's the marriage ones are pretty good examples.
Yeah, I think there's like a 60% failure rate. Maybe they should finish your course before they actually say I do.
Amen. Well, that would be a good requirement. And I think we were both talking earlier, having decision-making course in high school and using that as would be invaluable to the country. I think we'd make much better decisions.
So you've been teaching decision-making at Harvard Extension for 20 plus years, right?
Not quite. I've been teaching for, over 20 years, but this particular course, probably closer to 10.
What has changed when it comes to decision-making over the past decade or so, if anything?
Well, I think it's kind of interesting. I think behavioral economics, which is the core of the course. So behavioral economics, which is featured in Thinking Fast and Slow, is kind of the Bible of it, written earlier this century. But reading it and a book like Blink helped me form this course because I thought those lessons were really valuable. And I think what's changed in decision making over this time period is a couple of things. First, those books are getting better known. So our clients in my day job, um, now they're sort of demanding. We do a lot of market research and marketing consulting, and they're demanding that we look at things through a behavioral economics lens. As you may know, uh, before Kahneman and his colleague at the time, this was last century. This is like 13, almost 40 years ago is when they invented it. And it basically said, we aren't economically smart. So all the economists had this model that just suggests supply, demand, price, you cut your price. And they said people don't make decisions that way. We don't tote up the exact cost of things. We get fooled easily by all these biases. So I think it's a recognition of that. And now I think a bigger threat that's coming out is, of course, AI, because, it's kind of easy. In many cases, people default their stock decisions to an algorithm. And that obviously, first, we didn't have the algorithms available to everybody when I started teaching. And now they're available, and you can even give a little tinge to it through generative AI. So I think that's a change that I think is fine. If you decide it's a mystery, then what difference does it make which stock you pick? You might as well, if you want to trust generative AI, go right ahead.
What was Kahneman's partner's name? Was it Amos?
Yeah, first name, very good, Tversky, I think
Yeah.
is how you pronounce it.
I mean, one of my favorite books was Michael Lewis wrote the book about their relationship. I'll put that in the show notes. That was a wonderful book around behavioral economics.
And it makes it accessible. And they said they were going to make a movie, but you may know, I haven't seen the movie yet. And the creativity that brought Michael Lewis books to the screen is unbelievable to me, how they've ever done it. But they do. I'm looking for it. I hope it comes out. Sure. Well, with leaders, and again, I'll just cite Kahneman because he actually studied all this. He would call it the fact that it's confirmation bias is what he'd call it, and he basically, they ask him. He's been interviewed so many times, and there's so much written about him. And always, of course, they ask a question like this, and he says, and no matter how much you tell somebody, if somebody gets to be a CEO or they start a firm, and that's the easiest way to become a CEO, start your own firm, they've had some success, and so success breeds self-confidence, and all too often overconfidence. So you see a couple of data points that suggest what you're thinking about doing makes sense, and that's all you need. You're off to the races. And so I think that's the biggest bias, that we aren't careful enough and check our own decisions. We have such faith in ourselves. And another example of it is we rely too much on our memory. Our memories are not quite as, but you can't get it out of your head. It's your memory. That's what happened, even if it isn't. So those would be the two that you want to check. You want to check on somebody, is my memory right on that point? And, typical devices that we talk about and teach is, let's say you're thinking about taking a decision, and you have your startup, whatever situation you're in, ask your most trusted advisor or assistant, whatever, to really try and argue what you aren't thinking of doing, to really take that point of view, and to please do some research and find some facts that would support them. That to me is the best way to kind of check yourself, to rein in that bias. And I think after you do that, you'll feel better about your decision.
When you're talking about memory, is that what you're referring to? Your what's it called? The peak and roll?
Yeah, this comes from Kahneman again. Basically, he feels absent anything else, the things you remember about an experience. He said, first of all, and it's true, if I'm teaching for 2 hours, which believe it or not is the length of the course each time, you would be doing a great job if you could tell your spouse 10 minutes of what we discussed in class. That would be an amazing memory. Or you're just a good storyteller, or maybe both. So you can't remember a lot of that. And so what happens is, what do you recall? You recall the peaks or the valleys. And if there are tons of valleys, you just say that was a boring class. That we learned nothing. Or, gee, there were 3 things that were really exceptional. Maybe you took some notes. Those would be the peaks. If there weren't that many peaks or valleys, it's what happens at the end. That's the smart people. Many marketers have known some of the tricks of behavioral economics for years, but that's why, you kind of give somebody, a chocolate at night on the pillow is a nice thing to end the day, but a parting gift is the best advice you can give somebody. If you have a customer, give them a parting gift.
No, I love it. I mean, I've definitely not as studied as you are, but I love like Dan Ariely's work, Robert Cialdini, and the examples and the stories they use are fantastic. Going back to the first one, confirmation bias, I've found a lot of times the clients we work with, that organizations that struggle, especially from a cultural perspective, at the top is they have a yes man, so it's like, you have to have people that agree with me. And if you don't, you may not work out, you're not going to work out there. And I think that the big struggle with that is it doesn't bubble up any ideas. Nobody's open-minded and they're afraid to even share.
Yeah, you just keep doing it. You're fine if the situation doesn't change. If the environment doesn't change and you're successful, of course you'll keep being successful. On the other hand, of course, the situation keeps changing. We're certainly right now in the United States, incredible uncertainty. I mean, I'm glad your business and my business don't seem to be as fraught, but you can only imagine if you were managing something where imports was a big part of your business. That's uncertainty. That's a mystery. What is going to happen? And so, it definitely, the best leaders are the ones that are open to new ideas. And that's what keeps businesses going, right? The average lifespan, even if if you happen to make it past that first year when most businesses fail anyway, it's still, if you last 10 years, it's been an amazing run. And that's sad. The whole idea of incorporating is it's supposed to live forever. And that doesn't work out very often.
What recommendations or ideas do you have for your students or just for people listening around how AI is going to disrupt their industries when it comes to, especially right now, decision making, right? Because you're going to have to make some tough decisions moving forward, because what you're doing now is probably not going to be the same thing. Somebody could come in and really disrupt you.
Yeah, I think that's the easy answer. This isn't something we do. So hire a consultant who really understands AI and can try and imagine. You want to do a SWOT analysis. What are the strengths of our company vis-a-vis AI? What can we exploit? What's the weakness? What are our opportunities? Because for most businesses, there's going to be an opportunity, but then the threats. So I think I'd want to look at all of those before, as a background. I believe, if you're really going to be a leader, you really need to learn something about AI also. So hiring a consultant is one thing, but you should develop your own knowledge. In the industry I'm in, the research part of it, when we do market research, there are people out there who have what they call synthetic respondents. So it's a situation where they've given it the survey results from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 5 years ago, 1 year ago, and it can simulate, but it's all, and so instead of hiring people like us to do what I'd call real research, you ask AI, What do you think segment B would say about tariffs? And, that looks like a danger to me, at least right now, because you don't know exactly how it was trained or how it's programmed. So you're really abdicating decisions. Essentially, you're the same as earlier talking about letting AI pick your stocks for your portfolio. If you don't think you can add value to the decision, then fine. But the point you were raising was the strategy point. And just to get back to that, I think a leader ought to educate him or herself about it. And then I do think that's probably an area where hiring a consultant who's very knowledgeable about it, because then you don't have the confirmation bias. You actually have an outsider who is going to give you an opinion that is based on hopefully their experience and knowledge of AI.
No, I think you bring up a good point. And I think there's a couple issues or mistakes people are making around AI. Some people just flat out don't use it. I mean, that's going to be a big trouble. Second, they look at it like what you're saying, picking your stocks, where they're making AI the thought leader, which is just as dangerous. I think the third option, where your best bet is, and I'm curious to see if you're doing this at all, is use it as a thought partner that helps you challenge your assumptions and decisions. Have you tried using it at all in that form?
Yeah, and I'm curious how you've used it. I typically, if I am approached by, let's say, a new client, I'll ask AI about the client, and then I can probe a little bit. Um, Also, if you're starting to think about an area you don't know that well, what are the key issues? And I think AI does a great job there. Uh, I think where you need to be careful is, and I'm sure you're aware of this also, AI can make up some things.
Oh
It's
yeah.
just, it's basically a prediction machine. It's predicting what the next word should be based on however it's trained. So it's the database it has of words and thoughts. So that's what you have to be careful of. But if I don't know anything about the area, AI is going to know more than me. And I can then embellish it, double check, research some sources, which is always, as I'm sure you know as well, always a good idea with AI in this state. Maybe at some point it'll be reliable. Um, it's actually interesting, I think, that Google now gives you an AI answer first, which is just interesting to me. And I wonder if it undermines faith in the Google brand by doing it that way. I don't know, but you know, one used to have faith in Google searches. That's fair. That's what's going to tell me what's what. And they've replaced, they give you AI on top. So, that's their recognition of how pervasive it is. I don't think from the work we've done that consumers are, just your average person is really relying on AI at this point, but it's coming. I mean, and in many ways, it's just an algorithm. What we're calling AI, what makes it AI is its ability to think and build on it. I'm not sure that the current products fully utilize that.
Yeah. I mean, one way that I've used AI that's been helpful is in building compensation plans for sales teams. And I would take what I'd throw it into ChatGPT, and I'd have it like push me on, like, is it too complex? Will people understand it? So starting with something that I already have and getting feedback, I think has been super helpful, but not starting with having build it from scratch.
Good, and that's a good way to overcome the confirmation bias. I should have thought of that earlier. Thank you.
Yeah, no. Confirmation bias. A couple of my other biases that I like, and before we move on to Hawk Partners, is anchoring. And the other one is one of my favorite books is Robert Cialdini's Persuasion, which I believe you talk a lot about atmospheric.
Yeah, and somewhere behind me, I have that book. Anchoring. One of the problems is now, as you've probably seen, there are hundreds of biases that, so I kind of, being a classic old person, I kind of go back to Kahneman and say, well, okay, those are original, genuine biases, but anchoring is one of them. And, he meant it more for numbers. So, the anchoring when you're shopping for a home, you see a price, that is your anchor. And of course, then you're going to negotiate, and both sides are going to negotiate. And I think it should be included there's something called priming, which I'm sure you've heard about, which
Mhm.
is, uh, it's priming, you see a number on the way to work, and somehow you're negotiating something and age is in there somehow, you're primed for something. And that's very similar to anchoring and it just kind of means what's in your mind at the start. You can't get rid of it. That's the thing about, what Kahneman did, the system one and system two. Almost all things we do is this system one, which is just a reaction. And system two is what we conventionally call thinking. So that's where we're actually concentrating and thinking. It takes effort, concentrating. And so our brain saves us from thinking and concentrating. And system one, you can't turn off, right? You can't turn off that little voice that everyone, pops, that it's just you. So it always has an influence. And I think that's, persuasion is actually an attempt to manipulate, if you will, the just the things we're talking about. The what comes to mind, what are we thinking about that's a precursor. When I'm doing a sales call, and I know you do a lot of this, to me, it's always you start by just chatting with the person, trying to get some rapport. To me, that's part of persuasion. If the person I'm talking to thinks I'm a nice person, I, you know, I'm way ahead of. So, I don't want to just start by saying how wonderful Hawk Partners is. I want to start by understanding, Damon, and hopefully getting Damon to think, hey, this isn't a bad guy. He likes baseball. So that seems to me to be the key to that one.
Yeah, and also, I saw you talk about an article, and I read it in Cialdini's book, is walking into a wine shop and having French music on in the background, and people subconsciously even purchasing French wine because of it.
Yeah, that's the data, they say. It's hard to believe, except it really isn't, because you kind of think you're doing it. You know what I mean? You say, "Oh, that's interesting. That music, I recognize. Oh, maybe this," or it reminds you of you were ever in Paris if you're lucky enough to have been there, and that wine you had in Paris, they probably have it in the store. So, yeah, that's a great trick.
When it comes to, let's say, decisions, how much should be based off your gut versus actual data, do you believe?
Well, the way I think, look, in the best case, you're going to get them to agree. So that's kind of maybe a wrestling match, but that's what you strive for. If you can get whatever facts you have, an issue is, kind of facts are really under attack now, and in some cases for good reason. But clearly, we can't all agree on, what are the impact of vaccines for COVID. So more and more, I'd say you want to go with your gut. And the reason for that is, depending on the facts you have and how certain you are of them, our decisions are about the future. Facts are about the present and the past. So you really have to come and either trust your own gut, or if you feel, let's just take buying stocks again. I would totally trust my wife. She studies this. She knows what's going on. I have no feel for it. So my gut is whatever Janet tells me, and that's what we should buy. Uh, but if it's something you feel, yeah, I think I understand baseball a little. So before I wager on baseball, you want to have some facts, but tonight's a different game. And so you can rely on some of the past indicators, but if I'm a manager, I know you're a sports fan. As a manager, do you go by the book? Do you go by the analytics always? I'm kind of old fashioned, and seems like you are too. You can't always go by the book.
I think there's too much of that in sports and in baseball. I have a buddy who's a hitting coach in the big leagues, and he says there's too much of analytics and too many changes made all the time, and where that also affects the players and some of the coaches, it gets in their head too much, and they're thinking about that instead of sometimes, Rob, relying on their own instincts.
Amen. And also just to that point, it'd be a great fact if 60% of the time in the past in this situation X happened. Well, that means 40%, which is almost half according to my math. And so yes, you should have some judgment. What's the crowd like today? How's with Damon's, what's his mood like? Those are things I would put in. So back to I give too long answers. The short answer would be more gut than facts if they don't comport. Because if it turns out badly, if you at least went with your heart and what you felt, I don't think you'll feel as bad as, well, I went with all the facts, and the facts can't answer that for you.
I also think, and I believe this is a bias, but resulting, right? Isn't that a bias in the sense where you go about, you take the wrong process or the wrong road, but you end up with the right results? I mean, for example, I've heard Annie Duke talk about drunk driving. Like, you might get home safe, but that's not the right thing to do. Eventually, that's going to turn out wrong for you.
And while we're touting books to learn from, Annie Duke, who was she's framed as the best female poker player ever, I think. She actually had a degree. It's interesting how you only get one perception, but she had a degree in psychology, and she's written 2 excellent books on decision making. And I actually use one of her drawings because that outcome bias that you're discussing, that's the most powerful. I probably should have, when I talked about the success of CEOs, you could also call that outcome bias. I got to be CEO. I must be great. Therefore, I'm overconfident. Well, also there's luck. And so she felt as a poker player, you always had to say, do I have to change something? Let me review each of those big decisions, but let me remember luck, and so then you have to, it's part of your judgment. You have to decide what was luck in the outcome. But otherwise, yes, the outcome always kind of biases you back to your memory. That's the end, the peak, the end, what happened. And then you start to say, oh, that must have been a good decision.
I want to get to Hawk Partners in a second, but one thing I've heard you talk about that I also really believe in is learning from bad decisions. So you maybe don't make the same mistake next time. That's part of the process. Can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. And, the example I typically use in teaching is hiring, because if you're going to be successful, you're going to be hiring a lot of people over the years. So that's something we do. Typically, I don't think we do very well. There are very few companies where there's tons of tenure. So the economics are clear. You want to hire great people who stay with you forever. I mean, that's by far the most efficient model. And so I think when you're hiring, and obviously, if you grow, you're not doing all the hiring yourself, but others are. But you're probably still, if you're a leader in a company, no matter how big you are, if it's a significant hire, presumably you're in on it. And all the biases come in, but not talking about biases here. I think the flaw for most companies is they don't memorialize anything about that. There's no record of why did we hire Rob? Why did we hire Damon? Why didn't we hire Joe? They never look back. How did Joe work out? Can we follow Joe's career? Because that's part of it too. Are we doing a good job? Maybe if we record, so we don't have to rely on memories. Here's why we hired Rob. And then we can go back, a year from now, Rob was a terrible employee. All right, where did we go wrong? And obviously, if you're hiring hundreds of people, by then you have a big HR department. That's the kind of inquiry, if you had the data, if you had the information, you could do better. So I think that's really an example of how you want to learn from your mistakes. But if you don't purposely look at it, and I would imagine a lot of people listening to this have no records of anything. They know who they've hired, but they haven't really studied what's worked and what hasn't worked in any meaningful way. And more important than ever, nowadays, the tenure of companies is not just the company laying people off, which I think is terrible, but it's my kids, older than yours, their mentality is if you work 2 years at a company, you're not going to get ahead, move somewhere else. And so that's bad for companies. I think it's bad for individuals, but that's what you're up against. So hiring would be a very good example of how you want to learn from mistakes. The more you keep, many other people who teach decision courses, keeping a decision journal for all your decisions.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, that's what you want to do.
Can you explain a little bit about how a decision journal works? I learned from Farnham Street, and I might put a little link in there, but that sounds exactly like what you're saying to do.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that one, so I can learn something in a minute from you. The idea is, pick a format. I'm not big in our company either of, we have these clear rules. Everybody should do it the way I like to do it. So I think the first thing I say, just doing it is the major step. And what you typically want to do is talk about how you made that decision. What were the criteria? Sometimes people would leave out what prompted it. I'm moving. Why did I decide to move? Just so I remember that, because otherwise I might get it wrong. What research did I do? Just recording it. How confident was I? What did I decide? Something along those lines are the elements I would record. And obviously you want to do this not about everything you put into your basket when you shopped, but for, big decisions in particular. But what are the ways how do you like to, or what do you think is a good one?
Well, one of the worst decisions I made was we went from a full-time accounting team to outsourced. And we, first we had a good outsourced accounting team, but something came up. Actually, they're out of Boston, and their prices got much higher. So we were looking elsewhere. And I found this other firm that I was recommended to somebody. And so I started doing a decision journal about it, like, here's what our decision is. And one of the things that came up right away was they weren't very responsive, meaning that they'd cancel meetings, really, things like that. And I kind of blocked that out and I went forward with it anyways. And it was a nightmare. And Rob, when I went back and I looked through my decision work journal, I had it circled like this was a blind spot. So that was something that I should have reflected on early on in the process.
Yeah, that you've even built on the idea, because the idea of doing it as you're making the decision, again, helps combat the memory problems. You had a memory problem. It just wasn't top of mind when you were actually deciding. So I think that's great.
So Hawk Partners, you've built a fabulous culture there. And one of the things I've heard you say is that you and your co-founder are two very different type of individuals. Do you think that had a major impact on having such a successful culture that you're kind of yin and yang?
I do, because first of all, I think there's strength in that. If we always agreed, there might as well only be one of us. I mean, then so I think it gives us the power when we do agree, we're pretty confident we're right. So that's a great way. I mean, I think that's great. We still will debate things. We're in the middle of a debate now about AI. I feel much more negative about this synthetic idea than he does. But I think that's good for our company. We are principle based because our values, the two of our values, have always been the same. That's why we were friends before we worked together. We kept going. Then we didn't work together. We were friends, and then we did the company together. And so I think that is very powerful, even though we are pretty different in how we approach life. And we started it on principles. We agreed that professionals we hire, if we're doing our job and hiring good people, then we shouldn't be reining them in. We shouldn't do constraints. We should not demand that they do, accounting forms to the penny because we don't trust them. So we don't do any of that. That's an example of a core value. We don't have timesheets because we do think that's a tool from professional service firms. They aren't fully trusting their employees. It really is a management tool. It does some other things, but and I think it's because we agree on that, but we don't agree on many things. I think that's powerful. Now, I wouldn't go and search for somebody he's not the most different person. Our values are obviously very similar, but I do think that's an advantage.
I agree with you. I think healthy friction is very important. I mean, kind of going back to decision making again, groupthink can really, really have a negative impact on organizations.
I listened to, I know this isn't a political podcast, but just to the point you're making, when you hear cabinet meetings, these are supposed to be very senior people who all represent constituencies that are different, and all the meetings, that's not a meeting. Drucker is one of the most famous business writers, another kind of hero of mine. And, he talked about, the leader of GM calling off meetings when nobody disagreed. He said, why are we meeting? If nobody's going to dissent, let's get out of here. So I think that's good leadership, to encourage dissent, and you come to better decisions, clearly, and no question in my mind.
I do think it's important, and I've seen some of our customers struggle with this. You get everybody in a room and you hash it out, and you also have to make sure, I talked about this in my decision-making book, that who gets to make the final call. Is it by a committee? Is it by seniority? Whatever it is. Then when you come to an agreement, whatever way that comes, after everybody's been heard, then you have to leave that meeting supporting each other. The decision's been made. I don't know if you've got any experience with how you could help some of our leaders with that, because when you leave that room, everybody's got to agree.
Well, I think let's take it the other way. We've certainly, as a consultant, and you work across companies, you see where if there's open dissent, then that ripples through the organization, and you're playing politics. Then the company is too political, and it's not a good work environment, because by that, if you and I are senior vice presidents and we're openly disagreeing with each other about a decision that's already taken, which is your example, it's one thing if we're all deciding something, we should, respectfully talk about it. But there's a problem, because then every other employee, whether they work for me or for you, is actually making a political statement about it. And that's a waste of time and effort. So I couldn't agree more. The whole idea is you love to have active debate before the decision and great spirit behind it. Now, one of the tricks in decision making, though, is also, can you do a pilot test? Because then that gives everybody confidence. So maybe if you have particularly a big debate, but there is a way to test it, that's a way to take care of dissent and get everybody behind the test. And then we all learn together. And, that is back to your point about how important learning is. And, too many people today think they're a finished product, right? They come to work for you or me or somebody else, and they're not learning anymore. They're not reading. They're not, why would that be? Why would you, go to school and you try and get to as good a school as you can, and you're reading and you try and get good grades, and then you graduate and it's like, okay, I'm done learning. That's why I love teaching extension school, because these are people who want to keep learning, and it's on their time at night after, a day of work, and they just want to learn more. And that's the reason they're doing it. So teaching them is a real pleasure.
I got so many questions for you, but I want to stick with the pilot. Do you have an example of what a pilot could look like in a situation like that?
Sure. Well, let's suppose a company came along that wanted to buy us. We're not for sale. This is not, but let's just say that. And we're nervous. We like our culture. We like what we're doing, but it's a lot of money that they put on the table. So the way to try that is say, well, why don't we do a job for you or with you? I assume they're in some kind of business like we're in. So let's try it. And we'll give you an open, nobody else is going to come in, and we will agree even to the tentative price or whatever it is. But let's take 6 months of working together as if we were working for you. That to me would be a pilot test, and that would work well on both sides. So that I think that's a saner way to make business decisions than just, jumping into the cold water.
I think that's a great example. And if you want to even take it down a level, a big mistake I made back in the day was I was looking to hire a COO, and somebody on my management team said, "Hey, look, instead of jumping in and hiring this person full time, why don't we do a 90-day contract and see if it's a fit with the culture?" And I'm like, no, this person's going to be fantastic. I hired him. 45 days into it, I knew it was a mistake, So I love that example of right there of how that could have been a pilot. So talking about Hawk Partners culture, we talked about hiring, we talked about values and giving people autonomy. Are there more things that built such a great culture, or do you want to go a little deeper into some of those that we talked about?
Well, I would say where we were fortunate, I have to say it's somewhat luck, is we just hired some great people right from the get-go. So we still have, we started 21 years ago. There 10 people started with us the first year. One of them left to have some children and then came back, 10 years later, not just a maternity leave or two. And they've helped us so much because they believed in the culture. None of them left. So I think that's part of the fortune. We had, a saint join us maybe 6 or 7 years in, and then another one. And the one of the saints became our managing partner because I've stepped back, and she was our best business developer from the first day, a consummate professional, and bought into the values. So it's having that core. It wasn't just the two of us who started it. We had some early adopters, I guess I call them, and so I think that has really helped tremendously. And ironically, we did a little book for our 20th anniversary, and went back. We had written down the principles. Not that I'm a big believer that you have to have this mission statement, or I don't know if that helps. But our principles were important, and we did record them, and they were still true 21 years later. So I think hiring great people, you can't miss with that strategy, and being true to your principles. I think we've lived them. I hope so. And again, it isn't just my partner and I, or my co-founder and I. It's with our other partners who have really maintained that culture all these years.
One thing I disagree with you on is the luck part about it. I think that a lot of times you create your own luck, and by being intentional and doing the things that you did, that's what I think led to better hiring. And look, sure, there's probably some luck into it too, right? But how important is asking the right questions when it comes to the hiring process?
Well, clearly in what you do, that's a key to success, right? In terms of I think, what we try and do is we have when we hire people, and I do think that's an art. That isn't a science. We have always had many people interview somebody, and part of that is if they don't want to do that, then they probably don't want to join. That's fine. So for some people that's too much, but you might have to interview 7 or 8 people. And then we do divide it up by topic. We don't, in keeping with our philosophy, it's not like I would say to somebody, well, you ask these 3 questions. But over time, certainly as we grew, if there are 20 of us and 6 of us are going to interview every potential candidate, you get good and you see what questions have worked. I would have liked to make everybody write down their questions, and we would have done the kind of review I talked about. But we've never gone to that extent. But I think if you have people at all levels, that's what's key to us, with all levels of experience, because we don't want to hire somebody who, puts on their best show for the people they think are senior, and then they're with somebody who doesn't seem, isn't that old, doesn't seem like, and they kind of are dismissive. So we do think it's a good check and balance. And then everybody who interviewed them has a say. If somebody doesn't think they'd fit in, and we've always valued, to us, it's always about the culture. So if there is one trick, if you ask people about their background, do they use a lot of I or do they use a lot of we? So that's the simplest thing. If you just say, what are we looking for? That's more what we're looking for. Somebody who isn't taking credit for everything they accomplished, but recognize there's a team.
I think that's great. I think another little trick is when you're speaking with them and they're talking about things that didn't go well, when they're just a victim and they're placing the blame on everybody else. Like, my manager did this, or my teammate failed to do this. I think that's also a challenge. Is your philosophy, and maybe it just depends on the role, but are you really looking for people who are Ivy League graduates, have a ton of experience, or more people who are curious and have the right attitude and aptitude?
Well, probably some of us would have different reactions to it. We're definitely not necessarily looking for where they went to college. The sweet spot for us would be somebody who's worked for another company at 2 or 3 years in something that's relevant to us. So it could be a rival firm, because we think they might appreciate our culture. And, we're open about what it is. So if you don't like it, don't join. We do want to hire some entry level, because we think, first of all, you want somebody to do some of the tasks that, as you get more experienced, you're not going to want to spend your time, and hopefully you're adding more value doing other things. So one of the things we've changed over the years is we now hire some entry level, but back to the pilot test idea. So what we do is, each quarter, we try and have 3 paid interns. Most of them college undergraduates, but sometimes somebody who hasn't found a job yet, may be already graduated or is thinking about switching careers. And if they do a really good job, then we offer them a full-time job. So that's our pilot test. So we've never really hired somebody just out of college or who has no experience, but we have done experiments like that, and it's worked out really well for us. And there are a lot of great interns we've had. So I think it's worked out well.
What if you go 180 and you bring somebody in from maybe even a competitor with a big book of business, and they're toxic? They're a top producer, or they can be a top producer in your organization. Do you keep them? Do you integrate them into your culture, even with that type of behavior, or what's your decision-making process on that?
First of all, luckily, never happened. And I think that's part of, we really value, we have brought in to interview people because, of course, it's attractive. If somebody's coming to you with a bunch of clients already, particularly clients you'd love to have, wow. But our interview process often discovers 2 things. One, they're a rainmaker, so to speak, but they don't want to get their hands dirty and actually do the analysis and do the work, which is fine. That's a model other firms use, but it isn't ours. And so that's kind of a knockout right away. And the second one is not valuing. Usually it's our least experienced people who are the ones who speak up and say, when I was talking to him or her or whoever, they really weren't engaged. It's like they didn't take me serious, something like that, so we've never hired somebody like that. I think, have we ever let somebody go like after 6 months? Yes, but not the exact example. And I think it's actually better for both parties. I really do. I've been the one I like to think I'm a nice person, but I still feel I'm the one who will tell somebody we're letting them go. And I really believe it's better for both. They aren't going to really have a happy career with us because some of us just don't think they're that effective at the way we do things. So that we have done, but never for it's not quite the model you were suggesting, which I've been at I started my career, spent 23 years with a strategy consulting firm. And unfortunately, the answer for them would have been very easy. What are you kidding? Get rid of somebody who's generating business? What are you, nuts? So we used to, I don't know, joke, but we said we started this firm on the premise, if the firm I used to work for did it, that's the wrong thing. So that was one of our, it was a principle we didn't put into the book.
No, I think that's great. Either learning from your mistakes or learning what not to do. I had the good fortune from playing for some great Hall of Fame baseball coaches. I also played for some who were terrible. And I said, if I ever lead anybody, I'm not going to implement some of those type of behaviors. One other thing I wanted to kind of say that you mentioned is it's never easy letting people go. But if you get to a point where you're letting somebody go, they're probably super miserable anyways. So it's better for everybody. I mean, nobody wants to come into a career, or an organization where they're failing, and you're a lot of times you're doing them their own favor. So you're doing them a favor. So I agree with that. Kind of switching gears a little bit as we close out. One of the things I liked that you said, and maybe you and I need to start our own high school, is let's talk about why decision making should be taught in high school.
Amen. And as we were saying, there's so many things. Financial literacy is another. There are a couple of traits that are so important for your life, and there's no course in them, and it's not required. They're tools in decision making that I guarantee will make anybody happier with their decisions. Forget about better, necessary, happier. They'll be happier with their decisions. And same with financial literacy. You can learn, what are these things? Might I ever want life insurance? And our system is the only time, it's interesting. I went to a very good public high school. I was very fortunate. But the only time most of what I learned is relevant is when I'm watching Jeopardy. And that requires me remembering many, many years ago. So you could replace even geography. Now your phone is your geography. So why are we bothering teaching, or have a module on that 2 weeks of why things are near water and so decision-making should be a high school course. It should be required.
And the other thing that I think that you're right on target when it comes to education is that higher ed should incorporate internships or service years to get real world experience.
I look at my kids and at some point your kids, and do they really learn things that are helpful to them in their life? And that, by that standard, different courses and some real world experience. And companies like ours love to have interns. And if the school, by the way, if you didn't have to pay anything or you didn't want it, we do want to pay. I think it's fair. But if the school funds it, great. We take more interns.
What is one more thing you'd like to leave our audience with before I kind of recap?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing, and I'll relate this really to, kind of the marketing discipline where I've spent, my life in consulting and doing research. And I think what has happened, you asked earlier about changes in decision-making. And one that came into my mind, but not quickly enough, is relevant and it has to do with a bias. Another bias is what Kahneman calls availability. And that's kind of what comes into your mind. So it could be also the framing, the priming enters in, but kind of consciously. So you mentioned a brand, what kind of come into my mind? That's going to color all my perceptions about it. In the same way, if I'm shopping, many of the ads and promotions talk about multiple attributes or benefits from a product. And what we're discovering lately is really get it down to one. And yeah, you got to take a risk. You just can't mention 5 benefits. That isn't going to stay in somebody's mind in this day and age. There's just much more media coming into you, more information and information overload. So you really want to focus on what is that one thing? What do I want them to think about when they hear my brand? So that's something that's changed. It takes advantage. That's really what the availability bias is, that it's just one dominant thing. And that's what you want to focus on.
I think that is great, because a lot of times you are nervous and you feel like you got to share all these benefits of what your organization does. It's kind of like that analogy or example of, going to the grocery store and buying, I don't know, pickles or whatever it is, and there's too many choices and you don't know what to do. There's just so much chaos going out there that you really need to, as an organization, if I'm hearing you correctly, is kind of niche down almost and just focus on like, this is what we're great at. And then just have faith that that's going to work. Because if you throw too many out there, you're going to confuse them and they'll even end up having decision paralysis or go somewhere else.
Yeah, amen.
Well, Rob, I mean, this has been awesome. It's been a masterclass in decision making and culture. We talked about a bunch of different biases. We talked about behavior economics. We talked about the importance of hiring and building trust in your team to build a great organization, and about how you and your co-founder learned from what not to do and how being a little different, but having healthy conflict and all coming together at the end, what a difference that makes. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed my time. Where can our audience connect with you at?
Easiest way is just email. Thank you for asking. It's robert.duboff. My name is down there. Rob will work too. rob.duboff at Hawk Partners, the bird, one word, hawkpartners.com. And appreciate your asking that.
And then we'll put a link into LinkedIn as well, so they want to connect there. So
appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Listeners, I want you to do me a favor. Please rate and review this episode if you haven't already. But also, if you know of anybody who's struggling with decision-making, maybe whether it's decision paralysis or they constantly make bad mistakes, because if you make a bad mistake personally, it can affect you professionally and vice versa, share this episode with them. I think there's a ton of value in it for them. Or if you work in an organization or you know somebody who does, where the culture is less than what it should be, this is also a great episode to share with them. So do that. And until next time, everybody, stay curious, keep learning, have a great day. Thank you, Rob.
You don't need all this complicated tech. You don't need a massive studio. People do have studios, yeah, but there's some of the top podcasters do, but I don't. And I've done very, very well. I've had